They took your name, your land, your language, but not your legacy. Reclaim it at AfricanAncestry.com.
What an honor and privilege it is to have the legend himself, the great Anthony Browder, the historian making history here. I Never Knew TV. What's going on?
Life is going on, brother.
How can brothers authentically align their actions and decisions with their core purpose in life, especially in today's social climate?
Well, there's an old African proverb that if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And most people don't know where they're going because of how they've been socialized. This system is designed specifically to prevent people of African ancestry from knowing who they are, and consequently tapping into, cultivating the power that has always existed within them. So as long as we remain confused and ignorant of our essence, we will become whoever our oppressors say we are. So that's the game, that's the system, that's the war that we've been fighting for over 500 years. So in the midst of all of this conflict and confusion, organized conflict, organized confusion, there will always be a handful of souls who understand what their mission is, why they're here, and they will keep the flame of knowledge lit so that when people are ready to see the light, they'll see it glimmering in the distance and hopefully make their way to it and hopefully understand what they're seeing, realize that they're on the threshold of something much more than they've ever been told. And if they have the courage and belief in themselves, then they'll continue down that road and come to know why they are born and what it is that they're supposed to do in their lifetime. That's the goal of every human being on earth. And once you realize that objective, then no obstacle on this planet can stop you from achieving what you were born here to do.
You've spoken openly about the importance of mental liberation, right? In a past interview, you advocated for what you called a mental declaration of independence. Can you expand on what that means and why it's so necessary today?
Well, actually, A.C. Hilliard made that reference when he wrote the introduction to my first book, From the Browder File. All of us have to have to know that we have the capacity to be free and to be willing to think yourself into freedom. Everything that we do is a result of things that we think. So whoever controls what we think, whoever controls our thinking, as Carter G. Woodson says, controls your destiny. So if you realize that you have an obligation to be free and understand that freedom is not free, freedom requires constant effort, constant striving to better yourself. And once you achieve this elusive thing called freedom, then you've got to constantly work to maintain it. So if you realize that it's a way of life, it's not an objective, it's a process. And as long as you're engaged in that process, you can retain your freedom. And every time you're free, then you're going to be confronted with more obstacles that will challenge that freedom. So it's an eternal struggle, and it's that struggle that keeps you alive. It's that struggle that makes life worth living. And it's what we're here to do, to know what freedom is, right? And to be willing to express and demonstrate freedom as you move through the world so that your courage and your ability to express your freedom will inspire others to do the same. And that's how we change from this hole that we've been in for 500 years or more. There's been a deliberate effort to constrain our freedoms, mentally, physically, and spiritually. So if you're physically free but are not mentally free, you ain't free. If you're mentally and physically free but not spiritually free, then you're not free. So to make a total declaration of freedom is to understand what freedom is in its totality and not be satisfied with relative degrees of freedom, but to immerse yourself in the essence of this state of mind, really, this state of consciousness that allows you to tap into the greatest expressions of freedom known to mankind. And that's life.
I appreciate that explanation, because when most people speak about these topics, they always speak about it in the context of there's some point you reach where everything kind of cools down, not understanding that it's a constant evolution, right? And I wanted to ask you now, also heard you speak about the importance of unlearning things, right? What have you unlearned in the last 2 years?
What have I unlearned? I have
Recently now.
Yeah. I'm processing it. I've unlearned the foolish need to believe everybody, right? Not everybody has your best interest at heart. You may want to think that they do, but the reality is that there are people who, for various reasons, um, live to restrict your ability to achieve freedom or achieve the goals that you set out for yourself. And they oftentimes tell us or show us in ways who they really are, but we dismiss it because we don't want to believe that. So to have enough confidence in your inner knowing, to listen to that voice that is always there to guide you, direct you, and protect you. And when that voice, or what they call in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that spidey sense goes off and lets you know something is not right, listen to that voice. So it's important, and that was an important lesson for me to learn and to get over, and not internalize the anger that sometimes is associated with that discovery. Anger is not good for anybody. The other important thing that I've learned to appreciate the greater value of is health, wellness, taking care of yourself, because you can't do anything when you're ill, regardless as to how much money you have, regardless as to how much knowledge you have. If you're not able to move about, if you're not able to do the things that give life meaning, then what is life worth living for? So health and knowledge go hand in hand. And when you can balance the two, I think you can live a meaningful and productive life.
Why do you think that in the topic of discernment, right? Why do you think we're in denial about what we see or what we feel about certain people?
Because most people don't know how to see. They don't know how to listen. They don't know how to process and understand what's in front of them. And to some degree, it's not their fault. Everything that we've been dealing with in this lifetime is all a result of how we've been socialized. And so the system was created in order to minimize our capacity to succeed. And once you know that, then the issue is not necessarily you, it's the system. So you're going to live in this system for the rest of your life. You can't avoid it. But once you're aware that the system exists, once you're aware of how it functions and the parameters and limits of this system, then you can move through it, move around it without being negatively impacted from it. And that's a skill that has to be learned. Unfortunately, that skill is not taught in school. That skill is not taught in church. It's not taught in Masonic lodges. It's not taught in fraternities or sororities. If you're privileged to be in the presence of someone who sees in you an aspect of themselves and are willing to share knowledge that will allow you to move swiftly and safely through this world, then you are a privileged sister or brother. And if you encounter a soul like that, it transforms you, which means that you have an obligation and a responsibility to pay it forward and play a favorable role in the life of someone else who were once in your shoes.
Your work often reveals the hidden use of ancient systems and modern structures, right? From the Browder files, you mentioned the use of astrology and numerology in America's founding, especially during Ronald Reagan's presidency. Can you unpack how these systems, often dismissed, actually influence U.S. politics and culture?
There's a great movie called The Usual Suspects, right? And there's a line in that film that says, the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince people that he didn't exist, right? Now, I don't subscribe to the Judeo-Christian, Islamic, Hebrew concept of God and the devil, good and evil, heaven and hell. I don't subscribe to that. But I know good exists and I know evil exists. I know that heaven and hell are states of consciousness. Heaven and hell exist here on planet Earth. And that the forces that now control society know that there are other ways of knowing, that there are multiple ways of knowing, and that everything on Earth is determined by everything outside of Earth, everything within our galaxy, everything within the universe. Everything is interrelated. Donny Hathaway said everything is everything. There was a film out a couple of years ago that referenced everything, everywhere, all at once, right? We don't live in a universe, we live in a multiverse where things are happening simultaneously that impact everything around it. So knowledge of astronomy, astrology, astrologos, knowledge of the stars is simply an understanding of the positioning of the stars and the planets and the sun and the moon, and that their positioning creates electromagnetic energy that affects everything on Earth. So once you correlate that positioning in the heavens with corresponding things that are happening on Earth, you now have a guidebook on what to do, when to do it, and how long to do it. So that information was crucial when 200 years ago, when we were an agrarian-based society, when an almanac was essential to knowing when to plant, knowing when to harvest. So people study the stars because the stars tell you what's going on up there and what's going to be going on down here. So that's information that any knowledgeable person would want to master. Now, if you're a knowledgeable person with evil intent, then you want to limit people's access to knowledge so they can't threaten your ability to exist or thrive or whatever it is that drives these people. So those people in power understood the dynamic as above, so below. And so they understood not just the power inherent in astrology, astronomy, but they also understood the power associated with numbers, numerology, and that numbers are another way of expressing energy, controlling energy. I had a chance a couple of years ago to go to China, and Chinese people, because they maintained their culture for thousands and thousands of years, they understand the power of astronomy and astrology. So that's an integral part of every level of their society. They understand the power of numbers and numerology. So we stayed in this hotel, and in this hotel, every room number on every door in that hotel began with the number 9. So if you're on the second floor, room 203, your room number was 9203, right? And so I asked the manager at the hotel why that is. He said, well, 9 is a number of currency, of money. And so we know that, we believe that. And so every room has a number 9 because we're appreciative of the fact that you're bringing your money to us, and we're going to give you the service so that you feel that you were adequately compensated for the money that you paid us, right? And you will come to us again. So those systems, those governments, those organizations and institutions that understand the power of numbers or the power of the stars, they incorporate that information in everything that they do, but they don't teach the masses that information. Why? Because if you're ill-informed, you're ignorant. And if you're ignorant, you can be controlled and manipulated by people who know more than you. So that's the game that we're dealing with right now. And so the best thing that I've learned to do is to educate myself as much as possible by learning the power of learning everything. Nothing's off limits, learning everything, and then learning how to use what you've learned in order to help you negotiate situations and circumstances now and in the future. So that's my message. That's the reason why I write the way that I write. I write in clear, easy to understand language so that people can see what I'm talking about. Not just hear what I'm talking about, but see what I'm talking about. See it in your mind's eye. And once you see it, you're able to retain it better and access it easier, and it becomes a core part of your being. It's not, rote learning like in school now, where you teach to the test, and as soon as the test is over, you've forgotten everything that you studied. No, information is power. Information is valuable, and when you value the information, um, you will value the process of internalizing information, accessing information, and sharing information. And that value then is expressed in the people that benefit from the sharing of the information. And they in turn give back to you, which enriches your life and makes it possible for you to continue to grow and continue on that course.
Can you give an example of numerology being used in American culture, specifically, like as an example, the number 13?
All right. So if you look at the symbols on the dollar bill, there's 13 courses of stone on the reverse of the Great Seal. Those 13 courses of stone supposedly represent the 13 original colonies. On the front of the Great Seal, you have an eagle. An eagle holding in one claw 13 arrows. In the other claw, it holds an olive branch, which has on it 13 leaves and 13 olives. Eagle has on his chest a shield with 13 letters. Eagle has in his mouth a banner with the words E pluribus unum, which is 13 letters. Above the eagle's head is a cluster of 13 stars, and number 13 is repeated 13 times on the dollar bill. So whenever you see something repeated over and over again, someone is trying to tell you something, even though they may not be vocalizing it. So the message, the key is to understand what's not being said, but what's being shouted symbolically and metaphorically. So 13 is the number that represents spiritual transformation. And when you understand the fact 13 is not an unlucky number, we've been socialized to believe that 13 is an unlucky number, which is the reason why many buildings don't have a 13th floor. You get in the elevator and you see the buttons jump from 12 to 14. Well, point in fact, the 14th floor is really the 13th floor, but because someone changed the number, you think of it differently, right? So it just shows you the extent to which we're mentally manipulated by forces outside of ourselves to corral our thoughts in this box, right? And people spend their lives in a box when at some point, if you're courageous enough to learn outside of the learning that's been prescribed for you, you realize that there is no box, right? And so thoughts and ideas and powers can be associated with numbers. This country was founded on July the 4th, 1776. 76 is 13. July the 4th fell 13 days after the summer solstice, was fell on June the 21st in 1776. So once you begin to look at how things are constructed and understand the mindset or the consciousness of the people who designed them or constructed them, you'll see that there's meaning behind everything. There's meaning associated with the days of the week, and there's different energy that's expressed with the days of the week. Each of the days of the week are associated with a celestial body. Sunday is the sun's day. Monday is the moon's day. So every day is associated with a planet within our solar system. So once you understand what the energy associated with that planet represents, or the number associated with the energy associated with that planet, then it gives you more tools to understand how life in this particular society functions. Each society has different means by which they function. So once you learn to look beyond the superficial and to probe a little bit deeper, you'll find meaning there. And as you find meaning, that meaning enhances it, it enriches your life. And one of the challenges that comes with that process is, as John Jackson often said, the masses are asses. People are stupid. People have been socialized to be stupid, to be ignorant, and to be comfortable in their ignorance. And that's their choice. See, one of the other things that I've learned in life, I thought that I could just share what I'd learned with others, and they would get excited. As I had gotten excited, the light bulb would come on, and I'd have another soldier to march with me in this battle for mental liberation. And I realized that, as I made reference to cognitive dissonance, some people don't want to know. Some people are comfortable being ignorant, being unaware of certain things. And I've learned over time to accept that, because that's that person's choice. And I don't have the right to try to impose my thoughts and my belief on anyone. If you understand karma, if you understand that we all have lived before and we made choices about the life that we're living now, then I don't have the right to impose my thoughts and my views on you. I share what I know with those who want to know, right? I learn from those who want to share what they know. And you find that there are people who come in order to teach, there are people who come in order to learn, there are people who come just to take up space. And that's their choice. So I'm at the point in my life, I'm at the point in my career where I want to build with those people that want to build too. I want to build with people who are worth building with. And I want to avoid those people who are not going to add value in my life. So what's the Nigerian proverb? If you want to go fast, travel alone. But if you want to go far, travel together. So you want to travel with people that have the same goals and desires as you do. You don't want to just run with the crowd simply because you think that's going to provide you some layer of protection, or it's going to be cool to be seen with these people. No, you want to have discretion. You want to run with people who are going somewhere. And once they reach their destination, they'll have something to show for the investment in their time and their talent and their treasure, right? And those are lessons that unfortunately most people learn late in life, but better later than never, right?
I was going to ask, you kind of answered the question, because so many people get disillusioned and like they don't have that understanding, and it's very discouraging to them. So I just want to, when did that click for you?
Well, life is about learning and evolving. Earth, Wind, Fire had a song, yearn and learn is what you do. So when you yearn to learn, then you realize that we evolve, we elevate as we evolve, we progress as we grow. And the idea is everything is growing, right? Either you're growing up, either you're growing sideways, or you're growing down. You're going to grow. So, so choose to grow up. Choose to choose wisely so that you can grow in the right direction. And once I began to realize that everything is a choice, when I made the decision to leave Chicago and come to Washington, D.C., I was the first person in my family to leave Chicago and live elsewhere. I felt that it was time for me to go, that Chicago didn't have anything else to teach me at that age, and that there were lessons awaiting me someplace else. And once I left Chicago, I grew up on the west side of Chicago, right? And I'm at Howard, and I'm getting a call like every other month or so. One of my partners died, is shot by the police trying to rob somebody. So-and-so died, OD'd, and so-and-so died, alcoholic, drank themselves to death. Or, so I'm processing the loss of life of my partners, of my friends. And I had to ask myself, why are they dying and why am I here? Why am I here? I'm here because I made a choice to live. I made a choice to change my circumstances. So we all have choices to make. And when you have the foresight, the wisdom, the strength, the capacity, whatever term you want to use, to make a choice that's different than others, then hold true to that choice, right? And as Miles Davis said, if you're going to be wrong strong. Don't pussyfoot around. If you're going to do something, do it. And learn from your successes, learn from your failures, learn from the successes and failures of others. So you know what to do, but more importantly, what not to do. and you constantly reference where you are, reference where you were, and project where you want to go, and use all those reference points to get there as safely and as efficiently as you can.
For viewers unfamiliar with your work, right, especially your tours inspired by Egypt on the Potomac, can you explain the connection between Kemet, Freemasonry, and the layout and symbolism embedded in Washington, D.C.?
So because of the fact that I was born in Chicago, Chicago is the home of architecture. The first skyscraper in the world was built in Chicago. Chicago has some of the greatest architecture in the world. I had aspirations of being an architect. I took 2 years of architecture courses in high school. My freshman year at the University of Illinois, I majored in architecture. I was ready for a change. I left University of Illinois, came to Howard, changed my major from architecture to design. So I am by training an artist. I've been drawing all of my life. And the beautiful thing about artists is that artists have the capacity to see things that aren't there. Artists have the capacity to create things and bring them into existence. So because of my training as an artist, I've learned to view history through the lens of art, and that I can read a book and visualize what the person is talking about. I can see images, I can see shapes. So when I look at things around me, I see them on multiple levels simultaneously. I look at buildings, I could read a building like a person would read a book, right? Because I understand what goes into creating a building and designing a building. So I made my first trip to Egypt in 1980. I made my second trip to Egypt in 1985. And after returning to D.C. for my second trip to Egypt, I saw the Washington Monument and said, wait a minute, I just saw those in Egypt. And I realized Washington Monument is called an obelisk, which is a Greek name for an identical object that was created in Egypt that was known as a tekken. It's the oldest symbol of resurrection. So I began asking questions. Why is there a tekken in Washington, D.C.? And why has D.C. law mandated that there's no object that can be taller than that structure? So I ask questions, and every question seeks an answer, right? And as I was pursuing answers to the questions that I was asking, that led to the creation of what was originally known as the Afrocentric Tour of Washington, D.C., which I created in 1986. In 2005, I rebranded it Egypt on the Potomac. So that activity will be 40 years next year. And what it consists of is my curiosity leading me to answer the question, why is the Washington Monument the tallest object in Washington, D.C.? And by researching the history of the layout, design, and development of the city, I created the Egypt on the Potomac field trip. And so I discovered that America's founding fathers, many of whom were Masons, had an understanding and appreciation of Kemetic or Nile Valley history and culture. And that tekken, the Washington Monument, is a 6,000-year-old symbol that represents the resurrection of Asar. The Asar story is the oldest story, the first story of resurrection known to mankind. So when the Masons erected that building, I think around 1880, they actually they named the monument in honor of George Washington for the public perception. But inside of the monument, they actually dedicated to Asar, the first king of Kemet. So information is always presented on multiple levels. And so my interest is in drilling down into the deeper levels of the presentation of anything. So Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution set aside an area no larger than a 10-mile square that was to serve as the capital of the United States of America. First capital was in New York, then it moved to Philly, then it was in Delaware, then it was at multiple locations. And these white men decided that they needed to create a permanent seat of government for the United States. George Washington was charged with the responsibility for determining where that new seat of government was going to be. George Washington was, in many respects, the Donald Trump of his day. He brokered deals with people who own land in Maryland and people who own land in Virginia on the east and west banks of the Potomac River. And so he had them sell their land to the government at an inflated price. And once that 10-mile square on the east and west bank of the Potomac River was identified, then they came in and bought plots of land at a reduced rate and then sold those plots of land to the federal government at an inflated rate, right? So that's how Washington D.C. came to be created, but also a 10-mile square. A square is important because squares in masonry are foundations upon which men's lives are transformed. So it makes sense that since America was established by men who were practitioners of the craft, white men who studied African knowledge, and they used that African knowledge to lift themselves up out of poverty, out of ignorance. So they practice African principles without identifying them as African. And they use those principles to create what has become the wealthiest and most powerful nation in human history. So that's why you have African symbols on the front and back of the dollar bill. That's why you have an African symbol in the geographical center of the capital of the wealthiest and most powerful nation in human history. So when I began to identify those symbols as African or as Kemetic or Nile Valley symbols, because I made a mistake when I wrote the Browder file and said that the pyramid on the back of the dollar bill was an Egyptian pyramid. I didn't realize until I went to Kush in 2016 that it's a Kushite pyramid. The angle of the Kushite pyramid is steeper than the angles of the Kemetic pyramid, which means that in 1778, I believe is the date that they created the symbols on the Great Seal. Whoever those people were, they knew something about Kushite history, right? And they knew the power associated with symbols. They knew the power associated with numbers. So they were very, very strategic about creating this nation with 13 colonies, right? They're very strategic about placing African symbols, surrounding themselves with African symbols so that they could be empowered by the energy that is transferred, that is conducted through those symbols. DC is in shape of a square. The square is aligned to the 4 cardinal points of the compass. Asar's monument sits in the geographical center of that square. The main street that runs from the monument up to the northern point of that square is 16th Street. 16th Street is the spiritual corridor of Washington, D.C. 16th Street is the avenue of churches. You have more churches on that 7-mile stretch of land than any other 7 miles in the United States of America. You got 2 Masonic temples on that street. So the use of architecture, sacred science, is embedded in the landscape of Washington, D.C. And all they did was copy the use of sacred architecture that was used in Kemet, all throughout Kemet, specifically in Waset, or the city that's now known as Luxor and Karnak. So these white men were not original by any stretch of the imagination. They used ancient African knowledge to empower themselves while at the same time enslaving the descendants of those people, stripping them of their historical and cultural memory, and then using them as a free source of labor in order to create the capital which made this nation the powerful nation as it is. Now, I tell you something that I'm just really beginning to understand now, after all of this journey, that I don't think all of this was done solely to disenfranchise African people. I see it as part of a larger plan where Africans were aware that they were going to fall. And so they had to make sure that they would have the tools available to them to rise again at the appropriate time. So certain information had to be buried, certain information had to be hidden in plain sight, so that when the time was right to dig up this knowledge, to dig up these symbols, to dig up this information, you would have it at your disposal, and you can now use it to liberate yourself. So that, as I'm talking about it, it gives further explanation to one of the final scenes in Ryan Coogler's film Sinners, where Smoke is about to smoke the Ku Klux Klan. So he's got this box with all of these weapons, and he buries the box so that after he finishes sniping and taking out the core group of bad guys, living vampires, people who suck the lifeblood, the money, the energy, the talent out of African people, he then goes and unburies his Tommy gun, and then he smokes the rest of them, right? So I think that's a metaphor for where we are right now. You know, this Klan consciousness that has reclaimed the White House and that are very open in their arrogant moves to make America hate again. They're destroying this environment. And I've come to realize that there are African men and women in the midst of all of this who are unearthing certain treasures that have been buried right in their own backyard. And we're using those tools to free our minds and ultimately free ourselves. And it makes sense that this is happening at this point in time now, which is the 100th anniversary of Arthur Schomburg having written an article called "The Negro Digs Up His Past," right? And we are literally and figuratively digging up our past and finding the tools that we can use to liberate ourselves. So if you think in terms of Schomburg wrote that article in 1925, and a 10-year-old John Clark read that article, and that inspired him to jump on a freight train and travel up to Harlem to meet Arthur Schomburg. And with all of his youthful ignorance and arrogance, he demanded Schomburg teach him everything he knew. And Schomburg just laughed and said, "Boy, go and learn about your enemy. Study your enemy. Then study yourself. Then study the world that your enemy created. And then come back to me with that knowledge so that we can have an intelligent discussion." So in terms of young folk who are just discovering me and the information that has been poured into me, be like the young Clark and want more, but also be like the young Clark and listen to the information that's being imparted. Don't jump out there and try to do these things before you're ready. Read, study, process what you've read and studied. Learn how this information is applicable in different phases of your life, right? In different places in the world. And once you gain that knowledge, once you've mastered that knowledge, then come and sit at the feet of someone who can now teach you what you're now ready to learn. Because before, you weren't ready. It would have been like pouring water in a glass that's already full. So you have to be willing to submit to the process. You have to be willing to be patient. You have to be willing to do the work. There are no shortcuts. YouTube and TikTok are not going to teach you what you need in order to live to be 75 years old, 80 years old. You know, you have to learn patience. You have to learn wisdom. You have to learn when to speak and when to shut the hell up, right? Those are skills that are not being taught to a generation who need to master those skills now, because the world is changing so dramatically and so quickly that when this technology that is all you know is no longer accessible to you, you're going to have to come face to face with your real self. And rather than freaking out, you're going to have to step up. You're going to have to woman up. You're going to have to man up and tap into that ancestral intelligence that has always been inside you, waiting for you to humble yourself and be still. Stop bragging, right? And listen to the voices of reason that can get you through this difficult period so that you can get on the other side and be a service to those who are going to need your wisdom in the generations to come and the lifetimes to come. So you got to see yourself as part of a continuum. Your life is not just about this life. It's not just about what's happening right now, what you have right now. It's about all the lives that you lived prior. It's about all the lives that you're going to live in the future and how all of those lives live in the present. So what you do now will determine the fate of all of those lives. And when you understand how truly precious and valuable your life is, you won't waste it doing foolish things, engaging in activities that will not benefit you 10 years from now, 15 years from now, activities that will only hold you back and cause you unnecessary regret. So know yourself, love yourself, and be the best you possible is the advice that I could give.
When did you learn the skill of being happy for the success of another brother?
I think I probably internalized that skill all of my life. I'm an only child, so I'm comfortable being by myself, right? I don't need to be around other people to feel good. I don't need other people to lift me up. I'm comfortable in my own space. I'm comfortable being alone. I'm comfortable being quiet. And I'm also comfortable observing other people, watching other people. And as you watch people, or as I watch people, I see people who are doing good things. And I watch what they do. And I see how they do it. And I adapt some of those things that are good. I see people who are doing things that are not so good. I see what the outcome are. So I know what not to do. So I've come to understand that people do what they want to do. And the key is to want to do the right thing, right? And we're all here to do our thing, but our thing turns out better when we're doing it in concert with other people who also have made a conscious choice to do the right thing, right? So it's humane to want the best for others. Why? Because you want the best for yourself. And all others are an extension, a projection of yourself. You know, it's the old Ubuntu idea that I am because we are, right? We are because I am, and that a person is a person because there are people. We're nothing in isolation. You know, other people, being in the presence of other people, validates our humanity because we have an opportunity in our interactions with them to represent our association with the Creator, with God, Allah, or whomever, right? How you treat another person is a reflection of what you feel about yourself. So when you understand that, and again, part of that understanding is rooted in an understanding of karma, cause and effect. You know, what you give out comes back to you tenfold. So you should naturally want the best for someone else because it's going to be good for them and it's also going to be good for you. So everything impacts everything around you. And if you knew that, if you understand that, then it allows you to live up to your highest potential as a human being.
I want to discuss Joseph Campbell's use of African myths in Star Wars and Hollywood's quiet borrowing of African philosophies are rarely acknowledged. Why do you think African intellectual and spiritual traditions are so often appropriated but not credited?
Well, look, African knowledge and inspiration is the oldest source of knowledge and inspiration in the world. It's the greatest collection of knowledge and information and power in the world. So whether people know it or not, whether they're conscious of it or not, they're going to seek out that which is, right? I'm appreciative of what Joseph Campbell has done in acknowledging the hero's journey, acknowledging Heru as the consummate hero, as a prototype, as the archetype of the hero. And that hero's journey has been embedded in the journeys of every culture all around the world. So that speaks to, it really speaks to our humanity. And our humanity transcends our ethnic and cultural boundaries. If you understand on the very basic and fundamental level, this is John Jackson said in his, I think it was Introduction to African Civilization, he dedicated that book to the human race. There's no such thing as race. Race is a false construct. There's only one people. That's human beings, and all human beings had their origins in Africa. So everybody is of African descent. Some look like it, some know it, some love it, some hate it. That's a personal thing. But at your core, that's who we are. And any scientist, any geneticist would tell you that all human beings are 99.9% the same, right? So this racial thing is a misnomer. It's a distraction. And once you can get past these distractions, you can relate to the essence, the spiritual essence that embodies other people. And through a process of indoctrination, training, understanding the power of myth, then it's possible. It's quite possible to communicate with people on a soul-to-soul level and not get distracted by the color of their skin or other things that we've been socialized to believe divide us. And as a result of those divisions, one group of people can be superior to another group of people. That's nonsense. That's BS, and that has been used to control and divide people. So one of the things that I realized when I did the revision to my first book from the Browder file, I added 4 new essays. And one of the last essays is color, consciousness, and culture. Color, culture, and consciousness. And what I've learned throughout this journey is that this whole issue of life is more than about color, right? It's more than about being African. And it bothers me to no end to hear people at the beginning of this journey say rather naively that, African people are spiritual people and we all live together in peace and harmony and blah, 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 blah. That ain't true. African people are people. They're human beings. They made mistakes. So even if you look at the myth of Asar and Set, Saul was killed by his brother. That's the Cain and Abel story thousands of years before the Bible was written. It speaks to shortcomings within spiritual beings having a human experience. It gives us an opportunity to overcome those shortcomings if we understand the lessons embedded in those stories. So it ain't about color. It's not just about culture. Culture is a means of socializing a people within a certain environment. But certain cultural norms may work fine in this part of the planet, but they're not practical in another part of the planet. What is important, what I've learned that is most important is consciousness.
Before we move on, can you delve more into that concept? Because people think about why certain cultural norms work in one area but don't translate well in other areas. I don't think people speak about that enough.
Well, look, just look at nature. Grizzly bears don't live in the Arctic. They couldn't survive in the Arctic. In order to survive, that bear, that animal, that species had to adapt. And part of that adaptation is getting rid of that dark fur, right? And adapting fur that is more suitable to that environment. If you plant an apple tree in Egypt, it's going to taste different than the apple tree you plant in Brazil, all right? Because of the environment. And everything is shaped by its environment. And so if you understand the environment, you understand that our environment is mediated by the sun, all right? The electromagnetic rays from the sun hit the earth differently depending on where you are, north of the equator or south of the equator. And because the earth is a sphere, those rays north of the equator come in at a different angle and impact everything within the environment and everything on Earth. So not all things are equal, right? It's a matter of understanding the imbalances that exist at different locations and fine-tuning your movements in that environment so that you are not unbalanced, right? Everything seeks balance and harmony. Everything seeks ma'at, right? And so it's a matter of understanding how these principles overlap and being able to have the wherewithal to know when to make the adjustments in order to make the most out of whatever environment you're in. And so if you really understand the Neteru and Kemet from that perspective, then each Neter, each principle or aspect of divinity teaches a specific lesson. Impu or Anubis represents fine judgment because of the attributes associated with the jackal, right? Heru represents keen vision, not just the vision, not just the capacity to see outside of yourself, but also to see inside of yourself, not just the ability to see off into the distance, but to look into the distant past. So these things are not cut and dry, right? And they require the skillful ability to analyze where things are and where things are going and make the necessary adjustments in order to get the most out of that thing while you're in its presence so that it's not wasted. Those are skills that used to be taught at institutions of higher learning throughout Africa before the world was turned upside down. And the truth of the matter is, there's more truth that was taught longer than distruth has been taught or propagated. So there's a greater degree of knowledge, information, wisdom, and power to be tapped into than to be controlled by, right? And once you understand that, then you can choose to tap into that which is going to empower you as opposed to being frustrated and afraid by that which disempowers you. But again, you have to know that you have the capacity to make a choice and you have to have the wisdom to be able to choose wisely. So the purpose of culture in the largest sense of the word was to prepare returning souls to live a life within a community such that they can enhance the quality of that community for the benefit of everyone who's living now and everyone who will live into the future. That's what I think is the essence of life. And that is what I think this upheaval, this turmoil, this confusion that we're going through right now with this current administration is designed to turn everything upside down so that we'll have an opportunity to rebuild anew with those people who have the capacity to build a new world, to build a better world. And ultimately, we will reap the benefits of that work in the lifetimes to come.
I've heard you speak about in the past the power of a plant-based diet, right?
Mm-hmm.
How has that shift impacted your physical health, mental clarity, and ability to do the work you do?
I stopped eating meat and chicken on October the 12th, 1975.
75?
1975, be 50 years.
How did you get that revelation? 1975?
Well, look, I started listening to Dick Gregory. Dick Gregory was advocating a healthy diet. I read a book called Back to Eden by Jeffro Hulse. And I remember reading that book. He talked about the fact that cooking meat at high temperatures releases carcinogens within the meat and could cause death. And that was in 74. That was in 74 when I read the book. And I remember watching the evening news and heard either Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather discuss a new scientific report that says cooking meat at high temperatures releases carcinogens that can trigger cancer. And the book that I was reading was written 40 years earlier. So I realized there's value in this book. So I read that book. Dick Gregory had another book called Cooking with Mother Nature. And upon reading that book and then finding myself hanging out with people who were vegetarian, I saw another path that was a reasonable path for me to follow. So I began slowly weaning flesh out of my diet, and then chose October the 12th as my date to officially give it up, because October the 12th is Columbus Day. So in my mind's eye, then I was going to flip the script. And on the day that Columbus discovered America, I was going to discover my real self. I was going to discover health. So that's why I chose that date.
Before you continue, how did your peers' response, and also what was access like during that time?
Oh, well, look, it wasn't so much my peers, because I just graduated from college the year before, and I was hanging out with people who were vegetarian. So they were like showing me foods to eat, taking me to places that served vegetarian dishes. I caught the biggest hell at home. In Chicago, where I was raised on pork. We ate chicken like damn near every day. So coming back home for Thanksgiving, my cousins, my aunts would tease me, and I'm at home Thanksgiving dinner. Yeah, I'll eat the dressing, I'll eat the sweet potatoes, I'll eat the mashed potatoes, I eat the vegetables, but I'm not eating the chicken, I'm not eating the ham. And I was teased at first, but over the years, I'm the healthiest person in my family. My weight is maintained. I don't have high blood pressure. I don't have all the other issues that family members and friends have. And I have had some health challenges. I've been hospitalized 3 times in my life with a life-threatening illness that came out of nowhere. And in all 3 of those instances, my doctors told me that had I not been so healthy, had I not been a vegetarian, had I not, exercised or what have you, I probably would have died. So I got confirmation that my choices in diet saved my life. What I also come to understand as a result of my last health challenge is that those health challenges have come at 17-year intervals, right? And as I reflected on my life, those health challenges came at pivotal points in my career where I had been moving in a direction that was good and comfortable for me, but I needed to shift, and I did not want to shift. So I got sick. I wound up in the hospital. I'm laying up in the hospital, and my thing is always every problem has a solution. So why am I in the hospital? What did I do that contributed to me being in the hospital? Or what didn't I do? And as I answer those questions, I get the answer, I make the shift, and I'm well. I'm good for another 17 years. I'm in the hospital again. All right. What did I do? I'm accepting responsibility. This is my life. I accept responsibility for my life. Racism doesn't control my life. The white man doesn't control my life. They've got the influence, but they don't control my life. So I have to be aware of the fact that this is my life. I have to be willing to exercise control over my life. And the degree to which I exercise control is the degree to which I'm able to live. So, and again, the confirmation, my last incident was November of 22 when I had a heart attack, right? And had a heart attack, and doctors couldn't figure out why I had a heart attack. They run every test, and there's no indication. I don't have high blood pressure. I don't have all these issues, but I got a problem that they have to resolve. They resolved the problem by putting me on medication. I'm on the medication for 3 months. My cardiologist tells me, Mr. Browder, the medications that we have you on aren't working. You should consider getting a heart transplant. I'm like, well, that's out the question. But what would my mama say? My mama would ask that doctor, what could have been the impact of me spending so much time digging in 2,700-year-old tombs? Could I have picked up, a virus, a bacteria that caused this problem with my heart? The doctor said, I hadn't thought about that before. Let me refer you to an infectious disease specialist. She saw me, took my blood, damn near drained my blood, ran some tests, and came back with the diagnosis for brucellosis. I picked up a bacterial infection that runs rampant in Egypt. And that bacteria could be treated with amoxicillin. So I did 60 days of amoxicillin, and the bacteria is gone. I'm still dealing with the lingering effects of that it had. I had myocarditis, inflammation of my left ventricle, which resulted in the so-called heart attack. But by going through that process, I realized that what I needed to cut out of my life was the work that I was doing in Egypt, the Asa Restoration Project. That project had come to an end, and I'm still trying to work it. No, it's time for that project to come to an end.
How hard was that to end that project?
Oh, please, it was easy as getting out of bed. I realized that my life, I've done what I was supposed to do. I fulfilled that part of my assignment. There's another assignment waiting for me. So I've got to know when to close the chapter on that life. Close the door on that chapter, another door opens for a new chapter, right? So it's all about being present.
I wanted to ask now, you mentioned 17-year intervals.
Right.
Prior to you closing that chapter, did you have an understanding that it was over, but you were continuing?
Oh, yeah.
All right. I just want to.
Oh, yeah. Please. The Egyptian government was beginning to take or express a found dislike for people of my ilk, people who they referred to as Afrocentric, and accused us of trying to steal their culture, steal their history. So where we have been doing phenomenal work in Egypt, no roadblocks whatsoever, where I had raised over $3 million over the course of 15 years to do this work, to be the first person of African ancestry in history to fund an archaeological excavation. I'm not an archaeologist. I'm not a fundraiser, but by being aligned to certain forces and certain principles, I was able to do what nobody else has done. And it was time for that to end. And so I'm seeing what's happening, seeing people are pushing against me, and I'm determined to push back. I'm from the west side of Chicago. You push me, I'm going to push back, right? But then I realized, all right, it's not them pushing, it's the ancestors pushing me.
Facts.
All right? And so let me see what this new message is. And the message is, Tony, you've done what we set out for you to do. You've seen to it that this 2,700-year-old tomb that had been abandoned and had been raided by these Arabs, had been destroyed by these Arabs, you restored that tomb. You made it possible for the names of these ancestors who have been lost in time to be spoken again so that they can live, so that they can be accessible to you and others in the future. You made that possible. Now, so you've done your job. It's time for you to move on to your next assignment. And that next assignment was the Clark Project, and no sooner did we open the Clark Project than the forces that be want to shutter the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which was my reason for creating the Clark Project in the first place. So I got sense enough to step back and look at what's happening and then do a critical path analysis and connect the dots and see how everything is interrelated. So I know that as long as I continue to listen and follow the directions that have been given me, I will continue to be in the right place at the right time. My health will be spared. I will have time to spend with my family. I'll have time to spend with my grandson and pour my knowledge into him so that he can continue this Browder legacy, because that's the agreement that his soul made when he came into this life. So I understand. I can see very clearly how everything that has happened for a reason and a purpose. And as long as I'm aligned to my reason for being here and for fulfilling my purpose, then everything is going to be exactly the way it's supposed to be.
Brother Browder, we are extremely thankful for you, the work that you have done, the example that you have set, the wisdom you have shared today, and being here.
All right. And I can leave you with the promise. The promise is the best is yet to come, because I've got 48 years of experience. I'm at the point in my life where I'm cutting out certain things. The ACE Restoration Project is done. The Clark Project is done. And so now I'm ready to keep my behind at home for an extended period of time so that I can write. I got my best books here. And those are the books that are going to help craft the consciousness of the next 3 or 4 generations. So that's the fulfillment of my cosmic assignment. And I'm grateful to those who saw something in me to allow me to be around them, to learn from them, so that I can pay it forward and influence the generations that are coming behind me.